I want to focus because the mandate was to look at textiles and specifications to the point where you can manufacture. I had a director who used to say that you can make concrete life jackets well. There's a little anomaly there. But you do what you do and do it consistently and well. That is what you are attempting to do. We have the presentations duplicated so you can have them. And if there's anything that you need to ask me further, I'm here all day. You can talk to me, right? So we're looking at standards. What are standards? Now, textiles are covered by standards. And for your purposes, there are two standards that are really important, and those are TTS 625/2013, this one, and please forego lunch and buy the standard. This one looks at the requirements for garment construction, and TTS 76 2007, which looks at the requirements for labeling. Because in a lot of cases, we fall down on the labeling, especially with the fiber content. So when we talk textiles here, will be those that are formed by weaving and knitting. If you are satisfying the local market, you have to comply with the requirements of the local standards. But if you are attempting to export, it is your responsibility to ensure that you familiarize yourselves with the standards that apply in the market to which you are attempting to export. Because it's to the extent that you meet the requirements of those markets that your goods will be let in. And you know, a local manufacturer who was sending some garments to Barbados, and I pointed out to him that his labels weren't correct, but who have time with you, little woman? And it got to the port in Barbados, and as would happen here, the Bureau of Standards held it up because the fiber content labeling was wrong. Now he comes back asking me what to do. Now, if I was in my childish mode, I would have laughed, but I was attempting to be professional. He ended up having to make not a label, a stamp. So he had to make 3 different stamps with the fiber content, and Barbados allowed him to relabel by stamping the correct fiber content over the existing fiber content on the label. That cost him because he had to carry 3 people to be able to do it, to get the goods off the port where he was paying rent. And I say that just to point out that if we will do the right thing from up front, you save yourself, especially in a sector that is highly time and price sensitive like fashion. Now, the textile standards are designed to help you to ensure that your products are acceptable for appropriate end use. And I have these to give you. So, as Christopher said, I wouldn't be reading it as it's written there. So, the standards and the specs ensure conformity and acceptability in the contract between buyer and seller. And just to amplify the point, now, when you deal with large-scale purchases, anybody here work with government contractors? No? All right. So, when you start doing that, you know, the government buy uniforms, footwear. So, we have large-scale purchases like fire, police, millions of dollars in contracts. You're not going to be able to work with them unless you can work with specifications. And I have a copy of a specification sheet that I will give you. Your specifications specify the properties that will govern the fabric, and also so you have fabric specifications will specify things like the width of the collar, the width of the flap, the width and the height of the pocket, very, very specific, so that if some is made in Caroni, some is made in Port of Spain, some is made in Cedrus, they all will be the same, regardless of where they were manufactured, because you have worked with specifications. And it is to the point that we are not able to do that, that we fall down. I was telling Christopher, a buyer from Wrangler told me at a meeting in Atlanta that we are very good sample makers. And at first I didn't understand what he meant. And I think when he realized I didn't seem bothered, he explained to me that they attempted to work with a local manufacturer who made a really good sample. It was Western shirts, and sent it back. And when they got the order, what they got back was so different to what the sample looked like. Therein lies the basis for working with specifications. So that if we got accustomed to doing that, let's say somebody got a large order that they could not successfully complete, then if you have one of your colleagues who you know the quality of the work because they are working with specs, then you can share the work between you both, meet the terms of the contract, and split the profits so that both facilities are kept busy while you meet the needs of the customer. And that is when I talk about coming together. That is one of the big downfalls in the local industry. I'm not going to go into that because there are many. And for those of you who have been around for a little time, I know you know them. So we need to, and maybe it's Amanda's and Christopher's and their mandate to try to get this together so that it moves forward. Now, the players keep changing, but the issues remain the same. So standards and specs ensure conformity and acceptability. Now, how specs are developed, and I will go with this very quickly. In a case where you maybe want to develop new specs and you have a sample, you select the sample of the textile, and then the testing will confirm that the product is appropriate, or if it was done in use. And I'll give you a case in point. Like, one customer had, when they first came to have specs developed, they had a jacket, I'm trying to say it so you don't know who is the customer. They had a tunic that they had used for years and it performed well. So they could not tell me in textile language what they wanted, but they came with a physical sample and say, this has performed well over the years. So we start from the back. We tested the sample so that we can determine fiber content, the construction, the fabric count, and all of the elements that go into the fabric, and that is how we develop the specification sheet. Now, usually when we talk about things like weight, for the uninitiated, you'll talk about lightweight, medium weight, and heavyweight. But when you're working with specs, that wouldn't cut it. You have to talk about weight per measure. Let me explain that. Either you weigh in grams per square centimeter, or you weigh in, well, most of us, you go to the store and they will tell you this is a 7-ounce fabric. Try asking them what they mean and see what answer you get. What does a 7-ounce fabric mean? Does anybody know what that means? Or a better one, this is a 500 count sheeting. How they arrive at 500? And you know what? We buy it without asking a question. And we tell the customer the same thing. This is a 500 count, so it means it good. How they get to 500? It's per square inch? Exactly, but it's yarns per square inch. So when they tell you it's a 500 count, they are not telling you what is the measure used. So you're in the dark. If, however, they tell you 76 by 82, you know that there are 76 yarns in a square inch and 82 in the weft. But we don't, so we take whatever they tell us. We need to become a little more specific. All right? Now, in terms of design specs, you have to interpret the design brief. Forget the fancy language I used there. What it means is, to look at the design and determine what is required. And you have to confirm that with your customer. Now, the purpose of the garment specs provide data and construction instructions. So the garment specs deals with the textile, and the design specs will tell you exactly what is needed to put the garment together. So it will specify things like stitches per inch, per linear inch, like I say, the size of various parts, the dimensions for things like lapels, epaulets, cuffs, all of that is specified so that the garment is consistent. So when I talk about size spec, you have a size 14. What is a size 14? Now, when we talk specs, we also talk a tolerance. And let me quickly tell you, a tolerance is the amount by which a measurement may vary and still be considered acceptable. Good with that? So a spec will be written 3 inches plus or minus 1/8 inch. Yeah? So it could be 1/8 inch smaller or 1/8 inch larger, but it still fits. Because when we talked about sizing, remember, so one figure's bust may be smaller, but the hip. So to get it to the point where the size will fit the variation, we have the tolerances. Specs are intended as a list of instructions. The size specs documents will include all the points of measurement. So it would be bust, waist, hip length, nape to waist, chest. Yeah? It will also, all right, where I said there, a 1-inch hem, and it will tell you what stitch is needed to finish that hem. So it might say 1-inch hem with a 1 1/4 inch cover stitch. The spec sheet's basics will tell you how a well-developed spec sheet will tell you how to measure, where it is being measured. Now, sometimes you may have 2 sheets. You may have a spec sheet and a separate document showing you how to measure. It all depends on what you are attempting to do and how finite you want it to be. And this is the how to measure, where the measurements go. The sample of how to measure front length, right? Nape to hem, neck width, chest, across shoulder. And that HPS is high point shoulder, which is here. Okay, so when you get this copy, you will see it in detail. This is a spec sheet. Fiber content, 60% polyester, 40% wool. The weight with a tolerance plus or minus grams per square meter minimum. The fabric count, which is the number of yarns in the warp and the number of yarns in the weft. The bursting strength, pilling resistance, abrasion resistance, and you may think, who the hell have time with that? It is important when you're working with large-scale customers, particularly, or depending on the field you are in. If you are into drapery and bed linen, pilling resistance, abrasion resistance, and dimensional stability is extremely important. Now, with dimensional stability, you in terms of the testing, we look at the pressing and the finishing after 5 washes. Anything more than 3% change is considered unacceptable. 3% shrinkage means the garment or the article will become very much smaller, and 3% growth means that it's going to be out of shape. If you've ever looked at those cheap t-shirts, you wash them and what happens? The front and the back pull up and the side grow, and the shoulder end up down by your elbow. Now, if you know what you're working with, then you can circumvent some issues by your construction. So you have to tape the seams and the neck and things like that. But, right? So we look at color fastness, the ability of the fabric to hold the color. Crocking is a transference of color from one to another. If you ever wear cheap jeans and sit down on a cream chair and you get up and the blue on the chair, that's the crocking. There's also wet crocking where, like in my linen top, If I wore a white undergarment and this wasn't color fast, it will wet crock where the perspiration causes the color to transfer. Nothing is more annoying than when you provide the fabric and that happens to a customer. And then we have perspiration color change, and you know that happens especially with fabrics like acetate. So when you have acetate file and you make a garment and the colors start leaching onto other things. In terms of verifying the specs, we get into testing.